The international human rights movement has historical roots in the French and American revolutions of the late 18th century, the movement to abolish slavery in the 19th century, women's rights movements, and socialist campaigns for the rights of workers, women, and children. Many different dates have been cited as the beginning of the human rights movement. Some historians look all the way back to ancient Greece, while others point to the founding of the United Nations or to the proliferation of international non-governmental organizations. Part of the debate centers on whether you define human rights as ideas, laws, or social movements. Most of the law and developments that will be discussed in this course, however, have their roots in the United Nations system, which was founded in 1945 at the close of the Second World War. As the victorious nations in the war, the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union were the primary architects of the United Nations system. However, delegates from other countries, particularly when acting as a bloc, were also influential. The UN Charter, which established the goals and the structure of the new global institution, prominently mentions human rights. In addition to explicitly using the phrase human rights, the preamble uses other rights talk to indicate support for human dignity, equality between men and women, and equality among nations. Paradoxically, the Charter was signed in 1945 when large portions of the globe were occupied by foreign powers. These colonies were not considered equal countries, and they were not represented among the delegates. In fact, a section of the Charter established protectorates in some of these areas, arguably endorsing colonialism. The Charter laid out the structure of the United Nations, including the General Assembly, the Security Council, and the Economic and Social Council, often known as ECOSOC. ECOSOC was given the authority to establish commissions to monitor and promote human rights, though now there are many units within the United Nations which address human rights in one way or another. To give just one example, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, or UNHCR, leads international actions to protect the rights and well-being of refugee communities. In 1948, the UN adopted a Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a statement of principles that protected a range of civil, political, economic, and social rights. Over the next several decades, the UN passed a number of treaties that enshrined various human rights into international law. These include treaties on racial discrimination, civil and political rights, economic, social, and cultural rights, discrimination against women, torture, children's rights, migrant workers, persons with disabilities, and forced disappearances. Each of these treaties is monitored by a committee of independent experts. Though the requirements vary by treaty, usually countries have to make reports every few years on implementation of the terms of the treaty. Though the committees are not courts and they cannot force states to fix human rights violations, these reports give activists and pro-human rights voices within governments openings for advocacy. Some NGOs submit what are called shadow reports to supplement their government submissions. Some treaties also allow individuals to bring specific complaints to the attention of monitoring bodies if the country being accused of violations has agreed to this provision. The international human rights movement refers to more than just the UN, however. Regional intergovernmental organizations have set up their own human rights systems. The Council of Europe, for instance, adopted the European Convention on Human Rights in 1950 and empowered a court to adjudicate cases from all 47 member states. The Charter of the Organization of American States and the Declaration of the Rights and Duties of Man formed the basis of the Inter-American Human Rights System, while the African Charter on Human and People's Rights links together 43 African states under one human rights umbrella. Most recently, the 10 Southeast Asian members of ASEAN agreed to a regional human rights declaration in 2012. The European, American, and African systems all have empowered courts to enforce the provisions. Individual states have also increasingly incorporated the provisions of international human rights treaties into their own domestic constitutions and laws. Non-governmental organizations have also mobilized around human rights as a way to hold governments accountable and attempt to prevent future abuses. Some of these are large international organizations headquartered in the global north, like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, while there are also thousands of NGOs all around the world that use the language of international human rights to pressure their governments to respect human integrity.